Just getting into the depth of the next conversation, and then the moderator crashes into the conversation. I know it's a very uncomfortable situation. Trust me, I would love to have you mingling further around, but I'm the timekeeper, and that is the job of a moderator, right? But I love it, so no complaints. Ladies and gentlemen, if you hear my voice, this is the kind invitation now to go back to your seats, but also, of course, the kind invitation, just take your coffee with you, right? And the cake and the cookie or the tea, just take it with you, and then you can enjoy your cup of tea while having food for thought. So this is a win-win situation, right? It's great to see you. So come join me and bring your attention back here on stage, please, that we can forward and dive into our fourth thematic block of the day, and also, of course, back with our international audience on the live stream. Thanks for joining us for the Global Crop Diversity Summit. It's a pleasure to have you with us. All right, so this is the magic of silence. It vibrates. Let's breathe in. Okay, and this is the moment where the focus and the attention is back here on stage. Thank you very much. Get your seat, get comfortable, take your cup of coffee with you. And now we are coming back here on stage with our next... Who's still talking? With our next talk, from talk to action. There was a lot of keywords, right? How to make it accessible, this call to action that we are debating about. So, empowering seed banks for sustainable, resilient, and healthy agri-food systems. That's the title of the hour. And for our next panel debate, I invite now the Deputy Secretary of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture to join me here on stage. Alvaro Toledo is with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. We're getting to the next block, empowering seed banks for sustainable, resilient, and healthy agri-food systems. What is empowerment? To empower means to make someone stronger and more confident, especially in controlling their future and claiming their space. So we're talking about the future, about confidence and stronger institutions. While benefiting many different agendas, as we've seen this morning, the continued existence and availability of crop diversity is often taken for granted. To empower gene banks, they need to be appropriately included in national and international funding priorities. They need adequate planning and adequate enabling policies. New opportunities arise from the recent adoption of the Communique Global Biodiversity Framework by the Convention on Biological Diversity. The ambition of this global policy is for humanity to live in harmony with nature by 2050. Its adoption should be an important milestone for this family, for seed banks around the world, and for those who care about crop diversity. So seed banks are at the center of the realization of many of the targets of the new biodiversity framework, especially when it comes to maintaining and restoring genetic diversity of native, wild, and domestic species to maintain their potential adaptiveness. That's the wording adopted in Montreal. So seed banks should be proactive and take leadership for the achievement of this target and others to enhance complementarity, as said before in the previous block, with other conservation approaches, and to accelerate the deployment of biodiversity-friendly practices in agriculture. That's another target adopted in Montreal. We have the FAO Plant Treaty, which establishes the unique multilateral framework to enable seed banks to flourish, connect, and support each other. There's much that seed banks around the world can do together in the years to come, including learning from each other, sharing services and responsibilities for plants hard to conserve, helping each other when emergencies hit one or the other, building capacities and sharing technologies and good practices, and reducing the growing digital divide. Empowering seed banks requires concerted efforts by all actors in the food system. In turn, seed banks' capacities to partner with others should be fast-tracked. So how do we empower seed banks? We have a great panel to answer this question from different perspectives. In the previous panel, we mostly have those experts that are deeply involved in gene bank management. In this block, we would have perspectives from other actors within the food system, including those working in the seed sector, the human rights perspective, the complementarity of on-farm and in situ conservation, and how the policymakers are looking at our own niche. So I'm going to run through the next hour for you. We will start with a video from David Cooper, who is the acting secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, giving us some remarks about the recent adoption of the biodiversity Global Biodiversity Framework. Then there would be a keynote, and we will then have a panel with which we will have some interaction at the end. And then my colleague Katie will bring forward some of the questions received from you participants during the session. So with this introduction, I would like to present now the video statement by David Cooper, Acting Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity.
Greetings to you all. It's a pleasure to address this Global Crop Diversity Summit on behalf of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The global food system is facing a multitude of challenges. Many people still suffer from hunger or malnutrition, and our current production and consumption patterns exert a heavy toll on the environment. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution add to these challenges and jeopardize achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is a fundamental prerequisite for addressing many of these challenges. And the conservation and use of the genetic diversity of our food crops is particularly relevant. We need to ensure not only that our crops are adapted to current needs, but also that we maintain the genetic diversity to allow adaptability to meet future needs. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, adopted in December last year by the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, sets out an ambitious plan to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. It includes targets to maintain and restore genetic diversity, to maintain the adaptive potential of species and populations, including through in situ and ex situ conservation, and also to promote the sustainable use of biodiversity in agricultural ecosystems. The International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, or the Plant Treaty, and the Crop Diversity Trust, as well as FAO and its Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, are key partners for the implementation of the framework and the achievement of its goals and targets. The Plant Treaty provides the globally agreed framework in harmony with the Convention to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of crop genetic resources and to facilitate access and benefit sharing, while the Crop Trust has been instrumental in ensuring long-term funding for the most important gene banks and their conservation programs. I congratulate you on the achievements to date. Going forward, let's commit to continuing to work together with farmers and scientists and with all of society to promote food security and equity in harmony with nature. I thank you.
Following the words of David, let me warmly welcome Her Excellency Wenche Westberg, State Secretary, Ministry of Food and Agriculture from Norway, to join us for a key speech on actions taken by Norway to empower gene banks and increase diversity within the food system. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to this event. It has been a very inspiring day and a long one, so hopefully you will stay awake a little longer. No doubt that crop diversity is key in our efforts to strengthening the sustainability of our food systems. Crop diversity is making our food systems more resilient by adjusting food production to a changing climate, new pests and diseases, as well as consumers' preferences, and providing healthy and nutritious food. The title of this plenary panel 4 of the Crop Diversity Summit is From Talk to Action. I cannot imagine a more concrete fulfillment than the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. In February this year, I joined the 9th graders of the Longyearbyen School on Svalbard when they enthusiastically helped carrying 20,000 new seed samples from all over the world into the seed vault. The students were all 15 years old, the same age as the seed vault. Following the latest deposit in October this year, the seed vault now holds copies of more than 1.2 million seed samples safeguarded from 102 gene banks located in 74 countries. The Plant Genetic Resource Institute of Ghana became the 100th depositor to the seed vault. At the occasion of this event, panelist in the last session, senior research scientist Daniel Kote from Ghana said, "This, our very first safety backup, provides a sense of relief that our collections of crop diversity are on the path to being secured in perpetuity for the benefit of all humanity." The Norwegian Ministry of Agriculture and Food has the overall responsibility for the operation, security and financing of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. We are operating and managing it in partnership with the Crop Trust and Norgen. As Deputy Minister, I am of course very grateful that the Seed Vault is now the world's largest seed conservation facility. But in fact, I am even more impressed by the enormous efforts of all the staff at the more than 100 gene banks, like the one in Ghana, who make sure that the seeds are well preserved and documented in their gene banks before sending them off to safety duplication. As mentioned by DG Restrepo earlier today, the need for this insurance became evident in 2015. Due to the civil conflict in Syria, it became impossible for ICARDA to continue its gene bank in Aleppo, Syria. Luckily, ICARDA had duplicated its collection in Svalbard, and they became the first gene bank to retrieve their seeds from the seed vault. After re-establishing its gene bank in Morocco and Lebanon, ICARDA has managed to send new safety duplications back to Svalbard. There are valuable crop diversity that are still not safeguarded in the seed vault. In this critical time, securing important crop diversity is more crucial than ever. According to FAO, crop diversity also needs to be saved and maintained outside of the freezers. Crop diversity needs to be systematically managed and used by farmers and local communities and conserved in the nature as crop-wild relatives. To stress the need for these complementary conservation strategies, the Norwegian Minister of Agriculture and Food launched an annual contribution to the Benefit Sharing Fund of the International Treaty at the official opening ceremony of the Seed Vault in 2008. The yearly payment equals 0.1% of the annual seed sales in Norway. This link to seed sales is a symbolic gesture to recognize that Norwegian agriculture benefits from genetic diversity originating from other countries. For 15 years, the Ministry of Agriculture has given this annual contribution. The Benefit Sharing Fund enables small-scale farmers to access a wide range of plant genetic resources that are adapted by their needs. As a result, farmers grow different types of crops and plant varieties that taste better and are more nutritious. So far, the Benefits Sharing Fund has supported 109 projects in 81 developing countries, and it's very encouraging that the 5th project cycle has been initiated this year. In one of its projects in Zimbabwe, farmers worked with scientists and extension services to test varieties of sorghum and millet. They selected crop varieties that can be grown under more erratic climate conditions, which have become increasingly frequent in recent years. In farmer field schools, farmers enhanced the quality of seeds of crop varieties available locally and then conducted participatory selection of new varieties with national breeders. As a result of the project, communities can access genetic material from national gene banks and from breeders and further adapt these to local conditions. To create an enabling environment for on-farm conservation, farmers' rights are important. Basically, realizing farmers' rights means enabling farmers to maintain and develop crop genetic diversity and recognizing and rewarding them for this indispensable contribution to the global pool of genetic resources and to local and global food security. The international treaty recognizes farmers' rights, and in recent years there has been major achievements. The treaty has developed an inventory of best practices, which is now a rich source of inspiration-making experiences from different countries available. And the treaty has published a set of options to encourage, guide, and promote the realization of farmers' rights. At UN Food System Summit in 2021, there was a call for game-changing solutions to transform our food systems. Norway proposed to rethink how seed system development is supported globally. We proposed to ensure, through legislations, seed policies and action, that farmers have access to a diversity of well-adapted varieties of crops that meet agroecological and nutritional needs and preferences. In addition to our specific proposal to rethink the seed system development, crop diversity in general should be fully integrated in our efforts to strengthen the sustainability of our food system on both global as well as domestic level. Finally, I'm pleased to share that the Ministry of Agriculture and Food has just finalized an action plan for the conservation and sustainable use of Norway's national genetic resources for food and agriculture. The action plan gives structure to our efforts to preserve the national genetic resources in our crops, our livestock, and our forest trees, both in a dynamic way in the field, in nature, in the barn, and also as seeds, tissues, and sperm in frozen gene banks. We will also step up efforts to improve access to the national genetic resources for farmers, scientists, breeders, but also for hobbyists, consumers, and chefs. Norway's gene bank is in Sweden, and it is not our own. Rather, the 5 Nordic countries have joined forces and established a common gene bank. It is managed by Norgen, which is short for the Nordic Genetic Research Center. Norgen and the joint gene bank is a great result of regional cooperation. To conclude, Norway remains steadfast in our support for our joint global agenda for the conservation and use of crop diversity. I will encourage all countries to safeguard their genetic heritage for future food security and include crop diversity and crop development in their national pathways for sustainable food systems. In my closing remark, I will stress cooperation, as many speakers before me. The international treaty has been in force for almost 20 years and provides the intergovernmental and legal framework for our collaboration. This framework was needed to establish the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. The Crop Trust is an essential element for the funding strategy of the treaty and complements the Benefit Sharing Fund. At the global level, also FAO in general and the Commission of Genetic Resources in particular are important, as well as the CGR centers that are well represented here. And we need collaboration between the public and private sector, between governments, researchers, businesses, and civil society. Together, we can make crop diversity part of the solution to global challenges of food insecurity, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Thank you for your attention.
So one follow-up, don't go away yet. I had a follow-up question, given that David introduced the new Global Biodiversity Framework, and a lot of it has to do with taking those targets, taking those ambitions, and translating them into national planning. So I wanted to know, to connect from the video statement with your own intervention on what are the efforts that Norway is undertaking for translating those agreements in Montreal into your national planning.
Okay, thank you for a timely question. As a follow-up on the new global biodiversity framework, the Norwegian government has decided to update our national biodiversity strategy and present it as a white paper to the parliament. The ambition is to finalize the strategy by October next year, so it will be in time for the next COP. It's the Ministry of Climate and Environment that is coordinating this process, but the Ministry of Agriculture and Food is, of course, actively participating in the inter-ministerial group that is developing this strategy. Agriculture both depends on biodiversity and is important for maintaining biodiversity. This is particularly evident when it comes to genetic resources. The best way to conserving crop diversity is to eat it. And the agriculture sector should take the lead to take action to reach many of the targets on the global framework. To name a few, I would highlight target 4, that especially talks about maintaining and restoring the genetic diversity within and between population of native, wild, and domesticated species, to maintain their adaptive potential, including through in situ and ex situ conservation and sustainable management practices, and target 10 on sustainable agriculture.
Well, thanks so much. It was really great to see how a country like Norway is at the forefront of integrating plant genetic diversity in many different fronts, from multilateral cooperation to national planning to regional cooperation through the regional banks. So we're really grateful for your words, and we hope to keep cooperating with you in the years to come.
Thank you.
So I'm now going to invite a series of panelists to join me. The first one being Michael Keller, Secretary General of the International Seed Federation, who would provide some remarks on how the seed industry is working together with gene banks and the vision that the seed sector has for sustainable systems. Good afternoon, Michael. We have a plane to catch together, so...
I know, but I think the topic is so important we need to take the time. Thanks Alvaro. We heard a lot this morning about delicious partnerships. What I would like to insist today is on the beliefs of the private sector. And one of the beliefs of the private sector, and I think that's really important that you take this also, is our symbiotic relationship between the private sector and gene banks. Why I'm saying this? Because at the end, the gene banks are also a starting point for plant genetic resources to be used in breeding programs. And why? What is the topic we are speaking about? It's about empowering farmers. It's nothing else. It's our joint capacity to empower farmers. We heard a lot about challenges and needs. It means, what is our target? Empowering farmers. I would like to quote the FAO Director Q, who mentioned in the seed conference 2 years back, there are no good crops without good seeds, because seeds are the vehicle for translating the genetic potentials. That's the starting point. For us, the plant breeders, indeed, conservation of genetic resources is essential, since genetic resources are the very key for plant breeding. Breeders always look in the broadest genetic pool to start with, to make sure that they can do the best combination of characteristics. That means when we are starting to design a breeding program, we need to have the understanding what is needed, what are the challenges the farmers are facing, but at the same time, what is available, which genetic resources are available and under what conditions. And we know this is a topic. While it's important to underline this, I would make one point. Plant breeders are using commercial varieties, land races, crop wild relatives, and other gene bank accessions. But I would like to underline that 80% of our plant breeding starts with genetic resources used from commercial varieties or early germplasm. But this is not enough with all the challenges we are facing. That means we need other types of materials. And therefore, it is so essential today in this time that the breeders who are here to support farmers to have the access also to gene banks. And I would like to point out the importance of the condition of access to such genetic resources, because we need to have effectiveness and predictability and clear rules when the private sector is starting to access genetic resources. Please take also note that for the private sector, it's of highest importance to support the conservation. And I think you asked me also, hey, what are your concrete role in supporting gene banks, not only in the use of genetic materials, but also in maintaining genetic materials in gene banks. And here we have different activities as private sector. This can be in-kind contributions, such as regeneration of material in gene banks. This can be evaluation of genetic resources, characterizations also of accessions, and it can be direct financial support. That means you have different pillars where we are here to support gene banks. And let me just give you one or two examples. The Center for Genetic Resources in the Netherlands. The private sector is taking care of seed multiplication. And this for various vegetable species. That means there's also an evaluation part, because we don't know all the potential of genetic resources. That means we need also to understand the genetic resources itself with regard to abiotic or biotic stresses. And also, to give you a more concrete example, we had a company who received 199 eggplant materials from the center in the Netherlands for regeneration in its farm to see how they behave. We heard earlier on the World Vegetable Center, and there are lots of engagements between the private sector and the World Vegetable Center. And just to give you one example is several companies are providing contribution for regeneration of priority germplasm. Or for the national gene banks in the Philippines, we are here companies who are reviving old seed collections. That means you see the diversity of cooperation between gene banks and the private sector is a day-to-day business. We need to broaden this. But again, and I will stop here, the most important thing is our capacity also to use genetic resources and to support the farmers today.
Thank you, Michael. The seed sector has been very active in the new agenda for developing sustainable food systems. So what are the key contributions that the seed sector can make to such transformation, which is been the topic of the day today, and how can GeneBank play a great supportive role on what the approach of the seed sector is taking?
You know, let me start. I traveled in the recent weeks to 4 continents and to 4 countries, Bangladesh, Rwanda, Chile, and just this week in France. And I would like to highlight one thing. The private seed sector, in its diversity, and these are thousands of companies, day in, day out, working and collaborating with the farmers, has nothing else in mind than to build seed choice for farmers. And I'm bridging here with the Food System Summit. I think we had all the experience of the Food System Summit. I went to both, Food System Summit plus the stock-taking event. And I'm always saying, food systems discussions need to start with seed systems. Because food is starting with seeds. We know 80% of the food is coming from plants. For me, it's still totally underestimated the importance of seeds and the discussion on seed systems in the food systems dialogue. And when I'm saying this, there's a reality out there. It's important, gene banks, but there's another reality out there. You have many countries in the world where farmers have no choice, no seed choice, where farmers have not even access to find seeds for this planting season. And I'm speaking here for a planting season. I'm not even speaking about seed choice. What we need all together, and this is an initiative we take, and I would like to describe them. We took an initiative to increase seed resilience in the world. We need seed resilience. We need that the farmers can choose, because I heard formal, informal seed systems. Is the farmer looking, if it's informal or formal seed, the farmer is looking for a solution. We took an initiative by saying we need a Seeds for Food coalition. What is this about? That we have an inclusive seed system. The farmer is sourcing from different channels. We need to accept it. And this is important. We hope he can source from different channels, which can be a land race. And farmers are using land races, but at the same time, a smallholder farmer can use in a small plot a hybrid vegetable. And this, I think we need to remind ourselves, farmers look for the best solution. We need to be able to provide a diversity of solutions. Therefore, seed resilience is a priority. Seeds for Food coalition for an inclusive seed system, not opposing. We need all solutions, and the private sector cannot do it alone. We need to do it together. That's a call for collaboration. And that's also a call, we are signing a memorandum of understanding with the CGR. We need to build also better take-up of CGR breeding to the farmers. And we heard from the World Vegetable Center how it's important that we have the bridge between what is in the gene banks and the farmers. And the private sector can play this role. And on top of this, we also take more concrete engagement, for instance, in Rwanda. I went to Rwanda, and the government is looking for more diversity in potatoes. They have issues. So what can we do? Just sending their varieties? No, makes no sense. We need to build in the countries. That's a call for collaboration in the countries together. How we can support governments, how we can support public breeding, how we can support farmers to build this choice on the ground. Again, private sector is providing seeds, which is locally adapted. We cannot send seeds which is not locally adapted, then our business case is not flying, because I'm hearing very often we are sending seeds which are not flying. The top priority of all of us, locally adapted seeds. That's our role we have to play. And here, therefore, what we are looking for, clear rules. Looking on Kent next week, we are continuing the discussions on the international treaty. We need clear rules, predictable rules for the access. At the same time, we take our role in building more seed resilience. Farmers need to have choice in times where farmers are facing more and more challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for your words. I would like to invite now my friend Francisca Acevedo, who's an expert on agrobiodiversity and one who has actually seldomly visited a gene bank. So how can you be an expert on agrobiodiversity and don't visit a gene bank? Because she's been working with farmers in a center of origin, which is maize in Mexico, and she's been working with them to empower farming communities in these centers of origins and looking at how they could be supported. So, two questions for you, Francisca. On farm conservation and management of crop diversity is critical for food security and plays complementary roles to ex-situ. What have we learned in recent years about on-farm conservation in globally important centers of origin, such as Mexico? And secondly, what are the priorities for supporting small-scale farmers in centers of origin, and how can they connect more closely together on-farm, ex-situ, and plant breeding in the years to come?
So, thank you. I hope you don't fall asleep in this very small chat I'm going to present. I thank you, Alvaro, for the invitation. I thank the Global Crop Trust and the International Treaty for letting me be here and trying to convey what I think is most important. So I'll try to show you the immense richness that there still exists in agricultural areas in the world through our experience in Mexico. So Mexico still harbors an immense variability of its native crops, thanks to its extremely diverse territory that holds environmental, biological, and cultural very diverse conditions. The way these native crops are tended is inclusive, nature-based, and molded by evolutionary forces. So, you all probably know Mexico is a mega-diverse country and that it is center of origin and center of genetic diversity to many relevant crops to food and agriculture. Maize is one of such crops. Here we see native maize distribution along a very good portion of Mexico's territory. Each black pixel, the little black spots you see there, represents a sample of the amazing native maize landrace collection that was obtained in Mexico between 2006 and 2011. The map is showing mean temperature variation in rain-fed conditions. These land races thrive in very diverse climatic conditions, where each variant is locally adapted to climatic and social conditions. So each native maize cycle, agricultural cycle, in rain-fed conditions is sown together with the milpa by around 2 million small-scale farmers that produce up to 3 tons per hectare in a varied range of environmental conditions, as you've seen in the map. In 78% of all of Mexico's municipalities, that means 4.6 million hectares, where around 1.38 times 10 to the 11 genetically different individual plants are subjected to evolution under domestication each cycle, meaning that around 5.24 times 10 to the 8th mother plants contribute to the next generation with their standing genetic diversity and rare alleles, increasing the number of adaptive mutations that appear and can be selected for. So we are describing here, what I'm describing is a territory-wide ongoing breeding experiment on native maize, which represents an ecosystem service, an evolutionary service. These 2 million farmers, small-scale maize farmers in Mexico, also contribute to a second ecosystem service, which is food provision. They provide enough maize to potentially, because we don't know how it's moving around, to potentially feed 54 million people. That is to say, almost half of all the population of Mexico. This is something to think about. These small-scale farmers are constantly providing these two extremely important public goods to society: evolutionary services and food provision. What they do and who they are is irreplaceable. No. Let's go to this one first. What I've shown here, and I got this map from Kuri et al. 2016. What it's showing is primary regions of diversity of major agricultural crops. The combination of rich biological diversity and rich cultural diversity is still present in those sites. And what I showed you in the map just before probably is still ongoing. We just have to learn more about it. The crops themselves have gone through around thousands of years of natural selection and selection under domestication, and the crop wild relatives present in those sites have undergone hundreds of thousands to millions of years of natural selection. The environmental amplitude these genetic resources are continuously exposed to is simply enormous. So going back to the previous, oh, I can't. That one. So, for me, the question is Polaroid or ongoing movie? The Polaroids are in the banks, and I think they're very, very important, but they're pictures in time. They're just something somebody got out of the field and took back to the bank. And it's not going to evolve anymore unless you put it to evolve. But then there's these huge experiments that are out there all around the world that we should pay more attention to. So if we want real chances into the future, my bet, what I would put part of the effort is in situ conservation and really focusing on small-scale traditional agriculture, which is still prevalent in most parts of the world. Finally, I'm not talking about going back in time, like to the 1800s or the 1900s, but of providing the necessary innovation to make quantum leaps forward. So a word to action. Small-scale farmers need small specific productivity improvements. They need attention for especially agronomical problems. We also need to understand the evolutionary services they are providing. And this is not obvious. The other thing that has to happen from my point of view is that we need to make small-scale farmers participants and partners in research, development, gains, and profits. We cannot only look at them as users. They are providers of the genetic resources that everybody collects and then breeds and so on. So we should make them participate and listen to them. Their knowledge, as important as that of any one of the ones who are here, will certainly be useful. But there's a sense of urgency. A friend of mine told me a while back in Mexico, if something is not done in the next 10 to 15 years, this is over. Because farmers, small-scale farmers are becoming very old. The average is 65, 70 years old. And the new generations are not interested in keeping on with traditional practices in agriculture because they don't see that they benefit from it. So we have to find ways of dignifying what they do and recognizing that all of us, whole of society, depends on them, on what they provide. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Francisca. Please take a seat. Thanks so much, and remember to please submit your questions through the QR code. And I want to thank you, Francisca. As we move forward, I'm going to be calling on Michael Windfuhr, our second Michael of the afternoon, to provide some insights on human rights on an inclusive food system. So, Michael, you're welcome. Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. You talked the whole day about seeds, and I talk about human rights. What is the linkage, you had to say? And it has to do maybe with a question you have put for the last panel. Yeah, you were saying how to empower seed banks to be maybe contributing to sustainable, resilient, and healthy agro-food systems. That is the question for the last panel, and it has to do something, in my perspective, with human rights. I'm a member of the UN Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. We are supervising or monitoring the implementation of these rights, which includes the right to adequate standard of living, including food and water, regularly with all the states parties who have ratified this covenant. And we have developed in 1999 on the recognition or the request of the World Food Summit, which was in 1996, who demanded from us to describe a legal interpretation of the right to food as in form of a general comment on the right to food. We did it, we delivered this interpretation of the right to food in 1999, and it describes how important is access to productive resources for guaranteeing, let's say, food or food security for all those living in rural areas. And it describes the access to land, the access to water, the access to seeds, which are relevant for this. Later, in the system of the FAO and the Committee on World Food Security, there was a development of voluntary guidelines for the implementation of the right to adequate food in the context of national food security, which was done in 2004. And it is also one paragraph which particularly talks about the importance of those living in rural areas to productive resources. Again, it's mentioning land, water, and seeds. Yeah? And I think based on this understanding, several instruments has been developed later in the context of the CFS, the Committee on World Food Security, and the FAO, which are more specific. In 2012, it was the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure of land, forest, and fisheries. The International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources was also developed, which is then more specific on access to seeds. Yeah? And maybe this is where I would like to look into. But I think this understanding or this development is so important because still the majority of those who are facing hunger and are those living in rural areas. Yeah? So we have to consider this link to this. If now there is a development of an understanding that food banks should also be, or seed banks should be more available locally in many countries worldwide, and I think this is an understanding from the Crop Trust. I think this is also taking care of one of the demands of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. In Article 13.4, it's already saying there should be more, let's say, maintenance of seeds also in the countries available. So I think that is very important. Now, coming from a right to food perspective, what I have to build on is that you need functioning institutions for those living in rural areas to have access rights, for example, realized. Yeah? And what does it mean? If you look into many rural areas, you have a very sclerotic or weak institutions in rural areas. It's not only land banks, yeah, or not existing agricultural financial institutions. It's also that many farmers are missing even weather forecasts. Yeah? So how to manage that seed storage system or seed systems can be made, let's say, accessible for those living in rural areas. And we just heard how many people are still smallholder farmers contributing to this, but we have a variety of farm systems, also farmer systems. Yeah? Some particularly functioning middle-sized farmers, but we have also a large group of particularly poor or vulnerable groups, yeah? Often woman-headed farm households, yeah? Which are bare of any, let's say, resources to have access to this. And maybe if we now start thinking about what does it mean for seeds, we can go back to Article 13 of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, which is talking about benefit sharing in the multilateral system. And it requires four types of things to make sure that farmers can benefit from any seed storage system, for example. Yeah, it says it's first exchange of information. Secondly, it's access to and transfer of technology. Third, it's capacity building. And at the end, it's benefit sharing. So all four elements, I think, are responsible when you think about what seed storage systems or seed banks can really or should look into when they're working with this. So access to information. We heard already you were saying farmers need to have a choice. But in order to have a choice, you need to know what is available to you, what form of access you would have to maybe a seed bank or to the systems which are maintained. Yeah? So information is extremely important. It must be available also to particularly vulnerable farmers. Yeah? So that needs, for example, systems which can support farmers in having this access of information. Yeah? You would need, let's say, agricultural extension services, or at least services which make this information available. The second layer was access to technologies. So if you start thinking about farmers are inputting, giving seeds to the variety of seed banks, but they're also using maybe in situ replanting things. So they need forms of access to technological opportunities, then needs to be available also, payable, financeable, understandable. All this needs to be organized maybe together. I think this is a very important component. So it's access to information, but also to the technology. Yeah? The third layer I mentioned is capacity. Yeah? That means you need to have the information how to deal with maybe a variety of seeds. There can be the seeds you have planted yourselves. You have a lot of information on this, maybe capacity in doing this. But if you want to use maybe also other forms of seeds, maybe new ones, which you might need in changing environmental conditions, then you need to have also access to capacity. Yeah? And the last form is benefit sharing. Yeah? I just want to mention this because in all this, we know that many of the seed banks are living from the diversity created by smallholder farmers. Yeah? So the issues of farmers' rights, how to make sure that farmers can benefit from what they have contributed to this system or are regularly still contributing, I think is also something. And that needs to be done, needs to be available for farmers itself, but particularly also for the institutions working in rural areas. Yeah? So that has to do something with the budget you have available for these areas, particularly really to make it working. Yeah? So if you just talk about seeds banks in different countries in the world, there might be banks, but they are not accessible then. then for those who are really would be in need. So if you want to make them really reliant and healthy agro-food systems parts, these seed banks, I think you have to think about these 4 elements of Article 13 of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. And for each, you have to think about what does it mean for those living in rural areas and benefiting from this. So just to recap, I think looking at it from a rights perspective needs to be functioning institution or functioning governance for those living in rural areas, and this needs to be planted also in or thought through in all states, I think, which starts diving into having a seed bank and making it accessible for those living in rural areas. And I think there is a big chance also for the crop trust for crop diversity really to think about how to make these institutions livable or working or contributing to a sustainable, reliant and healthy agro-food systems. I think the link needs to be made. I have not talked about maintaining or in situ, ex situ, and maybe the storage in Norway. I was just talking about how to make the system linked to, let's say, to the right to food, to those who are in real need of having access to productive resources in order to feed themselves. That was my contribution. I hope it was useful. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks. So last but not least, we have Eliane Ubalijoro, Chief Executive Officer, CEO of CIFOR-ICRAF. And I have some questions for you, Eliane. Very nice that you're joining us. First, I wanted to check with you. The world of crop conservation has a strong traditional focus on annual crops. We need to expand our use of plant diversity in our food system, and trees can bring multiple societal benefits, including environmental and socioeconomic. But to unlock the potential, we need to understand these plants, that they have specific challenges and needs. What are the specific needs and challenges for these important crops that the trees that we want to grow more?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I also realize that I'm in between you and cocktails, and so I know it's a tough one, but this subject is a really important one. And for me, having had the pleasure to be a member of the Crop Trust Board, and now to be on the other side, a Director General of a CGIAR Center, where we have a gene bank, and we're really grateful to the type of work that the Crop Trust does in terms of championing the storage and availability of our seed systems from around the world. Trees are really critical, and you may wonder, today is about food. Why trees? Why trees? And so if you think about it, in the 101 underutilized crops in the world, 40 of them are tree crops that are really critical to our food systems. So if you think about olive oils, you think about nuts you may like to eat, you may think about fruit trees, these are really critical sources of the nutriscape. And what is really critical about the importance of trees in terms of crop diversity in the work we're doing and we're reflecting on today is that trees have a long life cycle. Trees can take years or even decades to reach maturity and flowering and fruiting, and this makes regeneration, breeding efforts, and evaluation of traits a lengthy process. Trees can have large size in terms of mature tree size, make storage of living specimens exceedingly difficult. Field gene banks are usually required. Transportation of germplasm is also challenging. You also have the case of recalcitrant seeds. Many tropical and subtropical tree species have seeds that are recalcitrant, so they can't be dried and stored at low temperatures like orthodox seeds. This complicates ex situ conservation. And many trees are dioecious. Okay, what does this really mean? It means you need both the male and the female trees to be conserved. And if you don't have that, you cannot capture the full diversity of what regeneration will require. In terms of hybridization, what we know is that closely related trees can hybridize and introduce gene flow across species boundaries, making conservation more complex. And there's complexity. As outcrossing long-lived organisms, individual trees contain tremendous genetic diversity that needs broad sampling. And then we have climate change. So shifting climate envelopes may require assisted migration of genotypes to suitable habitats. So what's really interesting is whatever grew someplace 30, 40, 50 years ago because of climate change may not be what is suitable today, may not be what is suitable in 30 and 40 years. So the key is identifying climate-resilient seed sources and rightly positioning genetic diversity to keep pace with rapidly changing conditions. For example, in Bangladesh, up to 80% of the Sundarbans mangroves could be lost by the next century. Local foresters are experimenting with planting uncommon mangrove species in coastal plantation as an alternative habitat. Remember, these are really critical, not only in terms of forestry, but in terms of everything else that grows in those areas that depend on the capacity for the mangroves to thrive. In Thailand, mangrove areas along the coastline are declining, while inland mangrove habitats exist around lagoons and swamps. And so pilot studies are taking propagule dispersal from inland and have been conducting to see how can we make the thriving mangroves on the coast come back again. And also, remember, mangroves are a huge source of carbon sequestration, so our capacity to thrive in a changing climate and to ensure that the crops we're growing keep thriving. So how we look at annual crops and trees together is really critical. And then we have deforestation. So habitat loss threatens in situ conservation populations and risks extinction. From the Global Tree Assessment Report, we know that 30% of tree species are threatened. And we also know that interactions with pollinators and dispersers are really critical. We all know about the critical importance of bees. But do you ever think about elephants? Trees rely on associated species which may also need protection. So elephants are frugivores, and when we look at frugivorous forest elephants, are excellent long-distance dispersers of large seed trees like baobab, acacia, and marula. And then we think about birds, hornbills. These birds disperse seeds of tropical trees like figs, and over long distances, and protecting hornbill habitats and migration aids gene flow. So resource limitations. We also know that tree conservation work is often underfunded and neglected compared to major crops. And really, I don't want to underestimate the critical importance of funding to major crops, but it's really how do we scale the funding overall because of the urgency of preserving the biodiversity of the crops we need so much. In terms of policy and regulation, access and exchange of tree germplasm across borders can be restricted, affecting conservation. I love the previous presenter in terms of the right to food. Well, how do we look at the right to preserving the biodiversity of trees that's so critical to us in so many ways? And in summary, effective conservation of tree diversity requires accounting for trees' unique biological and ecological characteristics. We have to look at the high genetic variability and also the vulnerabilities to environmental change. And it's a vital but really critical task that we really want to be engaging in as we look at the interaction of trees and annual crops. And the space of agroforestry for us is a really critical one where we can really bring synergy, where right now we can use a lot more of.
Thanks so much, Eliane. Your organization stresses the importance of finding the right tree in the right place for the right purpose. So how should we strengthen the conservation system for tree genetic diversity to deliver this goal?
So Ramni, who leads my gene bank, is somewhere here, and so this is her dream. This is the work of her life. And so we really should be looking at how are we aligning tree genetic conservation with climate-smart restoration. And it's really about bringing them together. So to support climate-adapted landscape restoration, conservation systems should proactively collect and evaluate tree provenances suited to target planting zones. So this strategic approach involves conducting ecological niche modeling to identify appropriate native species and sourcing populations for different restoration sites based on climate variables. We also need to undertake collections that acquire reforestation seeds and germplasm from locations representing environments similar to restoration zones. And remember, with climate change, these are changing, and how we're using digital tools to aid us in that is really critical. Establishing on-farm conservation stands and common garden trials across a network of climate analog sites that mimic conditions in priority restoration areas also can identify matching provenances. We need to look at characterizing functional traits like drought and salt tolerance that correspond to specific climate stressors in target regions to guide provenance selection. We also need adjusting of conservation activities over time as climate effects shift suitable planting zones. Partnering directly with restoration projects to bulk up and deploy pre-adapted diverse germplasm to plant resilient mixed species forests is really critical. We're at a time in the world where the agenda is let's plant trillion trees. But which trees are we choosing? How are we doing that? Are we promoting indigenous trees where they need to be? Are we looking at those intersections of tree planting, of culture, of food systems that are traditionally available? And are we really using all that collective intelligence, or are we just planting what is available and easy? And so these are really difficult issues that really require a collective intelligence and a systems approach. And so we also need monitoring performance to continually improve climate alignment of conserved materials with evolving restoration area condition. And so what is also really critical is expanding ex situ collections and field gene banks to include diverse fruit, nut, oil, and medicinal tree species that provide food, nutrition, and income sources for rural communities is really critical. And also, some of the work we do in dendrochronology is really critical because tropical trees have growth that is very different from temperate trees. And the work we're doing in dendrochronology looks at how climate is stressing trees. And that's really critical to understand how are trees adapting to a changing climate. What is thriving and what isn't? What should be grown in certain regions and versus others? And if you're looking at reforestation, what are the pioneer species you should be looking at depending on where you're looking and wanting to grow trees? We're at a time where, last summer there were forest fires around the world, and what we know is that when we have tree plantations that are monocrops, we have greater chances of forest fires. And we're losing more and more trees from forest fires around the world. So what we also know is genetic diversity protects forests. We also know that we're in a time where the opportunity to grow trees on farm is actually greater than in forests. So how smallholder farmers can be critical agents to connecting nature is even more important. So not only are they stewards for many of the foods that we all eat, but also they are stewards to the biodiversity conservation we need to really become climate resilient and ensure that the stewardship of tree biodiversity for our nutriscapes are also maintained.
Thanks so much, Eliane. Please take a seat. Well, now with Eliane, we've concluded our panel. It's been a great panel in the sense that we've touched upon many of the current policy discussions that are around food and agriculture. If you take a look, you could see how there are examples. Earlier in the morning, the Minister of Agriculture of Germany explained how they are developing a new conservation strategy for genetic resources, building on the adoption of the Communique Montreal Biodiversity Framework. So there's a lot of emphasis now on opportunities to implement the new biodiversity framework by planning new plans to conserve and use diversity. It's an opportunity that this family, the family of crop diversity, needs to take very seriously. It's an opportunity that will only happen every decade or so. So this time it should be our time, and should be a time for working together, not only in on-farm, not only in ex situ, not only in breeding and seed development. It should be a time for working together. So that's another take-home message. I think there were very good interventions related to how inclusive seed systems should be central in the discussions on food systems. I think everybody agrees on that. We may not fully agree what is an inclusive seed system. We do agree, I think, that the national context and realities will, in any case, inform a lot of those decisions. So there's a common pathway that we could also take together and strengthen in the years to come. So I really want to thank all of my panelists, and one of them, Michael, and myself, have to leave now because we have to take a plane. So we leave the other three with my colleague Katie for some follow-up questions that may have arisen from the QR exchanges. So I thank everyone here. I'm really sorry to have to leave, but it's really the only chance for me to catch that flight. And thanks so much for your attention. Muchas gracias. Thanks so much. I'm sorry I got to leave. See you in Rome.
Thank you. All the best. Gracias. All right, so it's us. Let's sit down. Good luck with catching the plane. See you next time. All right, I brought some questions. Shall we move on a little bit? So, yeah. I brought your questions, ladies and gentlemen, to that stage, of course. Thank you so much for your inputs and your keynotes. So I'd like to start with the first question that comes up in the context when we talk about Mexico. So Francisca, this question goes into your direction. When you talk about the important role of small-scale farmers in Mexico, what is the role of small-scale breeders? Do they exist? Does it exist? So can you give us a glimpse of how you would answer that question? Number 2, please.
Hello? Yeah. There are small-scale breeders. Small-scale farmers are small-scale breeders, and there's also many breeders in places like Mexico that work at the national level. I was very sad when I started working at CONABIO and I went to a meeting and found out that the whole breeding program at the national level for wheat was very low in money. So breeders need to have much more, I can't remember the word in English.
What is it in French or Spanish or German?
In German I can't speak, but pitch in a lot of more credibility in them, helping them out to be able to work financially, but otherwise as well. No? So yes, small breeders do exist and are very important. And I would say that participatory plant breeding is very important. And now we're looking into evolutionary plant breeding, which is also very, very important, putting a lot of crop diversity into the fields in the communities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So another question goes into the context of human rights, of course. So Michael, I'm looking towards you because, of course, that's your silo. So one thing is a question that also kept us busy in the morning. How are human rights linked to the discussion of crop diversity? So you made that linkages already, but maybe you can bring it down again. How are human rights linked to discussion of crop diversity, and also the discussion and the question of how to include the gender aspect into this discussion of crop diversity. So 2 questions in one with very big keywords concerning human rights and gender rights.
Yeah. Thanks for this question. Well, I tried to be explicit that smallholder farmers in a lot of parts of the world are contributing, or farmers in general are contributing to the diversity which we have, and they have done it historically. And one of the important issues is that they should benefit in the use of these resources. Yeah, and it's the farmers' families who have to benefit, but also the food systems who have to benefit from this contribution. So it needs to be a feedback. Therefore, I think localized seed banks is a good idea, yeah, because it might link local food systems much more to the resilience of the food system, yeah, to the storage capacities, so on. Secondly, I've said the system needs to be accessible for those living in rural areas, yeah, and I mentioned the different categories which are important. And this is extremely important. Yeah? The system is, if you just create them and you don't think about functioning institutions which can link it to those living in rural areas, we are missing so much. Yeah? And talking about the right to food is always talking about responsible governance vis-à-vis those who are particularly marginalized or vulnerable. Yeah? They need to get into attention in national agricultural politics, in national politics on seed banks, and in the linkages between this. Yeah? Woman-headed households are particularly vulnerable groups in many rural areas, yeah, because they often have not secured access to, for example, productive resources like land. Yeah? They have often problems in getting access to credit systems. Yeah? They have often problems in having the educational level because they were family-wise or in other aspects not having the same opportunities to access to this. So particularly when we think about how to create access of such a system of seed banks to those maybe woman-headed households, yeah, then we have to think about what are the necessities they need to be able to access it, yeah, and benefit from this. Yeah? And this is not just talk, it's really important if we want to make sure that those families can get an income from agriculture. Yeah? And we talk about this all in the context of a triple planetary crisis where the circumstances are changing a lot. So that means also that those farmers who have maybe contributed most to the diversity which we have, yeah, have the largest impact of having access maybe to be able also to maybe move fast enough to transform themselves, yeah, having knowledge and access to knowledge to this. Yeah? So therefore, it's another investment, yeah, and we can't just do it only technically. We need to be thinking about how to make the bridge to those living in rural areas. Yeah?
Eliane, I'd like also to pass on the question towards you, because of course you were mentioning the importance of trees and the tree conservation. When you bring that into the debate of also engaging the very vulnerable groups and communities in order to strengthen the tree conservation, what are best practices, what helps and what doesn't help?
So I think one of the things we first have to look at is what are the cash crops? You know, there are crops we call women's crops, because often they're less lucrative, they're not for the export markets. And so when it comes to indigenous crops, indigenous tree species that are contributing to local nutrition but may not be as marketable, those are the crops that are often seen as the ones that are stewarded by the most marginalized and vulnerable groups. But at the same time, they also contain the most value in terms of biocultural context. And so the tension we hold today is how do we ensure the preservation of the biodiversity that is often held by indigenous, local, and women, while at the same time, we live in a world where most of our nutrition is coming from very few crops. So that tension we hold is a really critical one. But what we know, for example, is that in times of famine, in times of drought, a lot of people in rural areas will go to trees to get additional nutrition to meet their needs. And so I think what is needed is how do we take that biodiversity and ensure in the restoration project, on-farm multiplying in terms of diverse incomes for farmers, how do we create that multiplicity? So for example, a few weeks ago, I was in Rwanda, which is where I was born, and I met a smallholder farmer who had 1 hectare of land. And on that 1 hectare, he was growing over 10 different crops. And so he had trees that he was growing for green manuring, so as fertilizer. He had maize that he was growing to feed his family and to sell. He had fruit trees. He had timber trees. He had trees that he's using branches for beanstalks to grow the beans on. And he was telling me how the variety of different crops he was growing on this 1 hectare of land not only met the needs for nutrition for his family, but also supplemented income, gave him income as well as sources of energy for cooking. And what he was doing as a champion farmer working with ICRAF is that he was training other farmers to be able to do the same. And this is in a very dry region of Rwanda. And so when I met a community, a cooperative, that was also practicing agroforestry, what was exciting to me is in an area of Rwanda where there was a lot of hunger, they were saying, look, we're not hungry anymore. We're producing enough for ourselves. We're selling what we don't need, and we're able to buy more land to grow more things. And we're also stewards of the landscape. And so they were able, because of that variety that they were growing on the same land, preserve water, be able to be more climate resilient. And they asked me, they said, look, all that we ask you to do is help more farmers do this work. And so really, it's about how do we understand the multiple needs of smallholder farmers and take the variety of trees and crops that we can help them grow to meet their own needs, have sustainability, but also build a prosperous smallholder farm. And so those are really about listening in to those collective needs. And this is why how we listen to the needs of marginalized populations can help us not only solve food security issues, but also preserve biodiversity and become more climate resilient. And so for me, this is the real excitement around how do we work with the most marginalized populations that are really the majority on this planet, and help them be the stewards that they can be if we really promote crop biodiversity, including trees, of course.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is your round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, you can read some more thoughts on the scientific paper of the conference as well. So there are all the keywords that we were throwing into the air. They are then in full length in the scientific paper of the conference. I also thank you for your questions. Thank you very much. This was the last round of our Slido questioning round. So thanks everybody for submitting the questions, and thank you again for attending. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next guest on stage is not a scientist, but an artist. So he has a strong thematic focus on food production and the human relation towards it. Since close to 20 years, he has been documenting our declining crop diversity and the things that are replacing it. And he had recent exhibitions, including the food in New York, at the Museum of the City of New York in the USA, and the Brno Art Open 2022 at the House of Arts, and also the theme of food bigger than the plate at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, UK. So it's a big pleasure to have you with us today. This is Uli Westphal. Thank you.
I want to thank the Crop Trust and Stefan Schmitz for inviting me. It's a huge honor for me to be here among you. I'm a visual artist, and yeah, as Katie said, I've been documenting crop diversity for almost 2 decades. And I grew up in a small town in rural northwest Germany. And although I was surrounded by agriculture, I wasn't really connected to the sources of my food. So fruits and vegetables came from the supermarket, and they looked like this. When I moved to Berlin in 2005, I started getting my groceries from local street markets, but the produce here often looked different. And I was intrigued by the beauty and the sculptural qualities of these fruits and vegetables, but they also immediately triggered the question, why would I never find shapes like these in a regular supermarket? And despite their unusual appearance, they were delicious. I started searching specifically for these strange vegetables and photographing them and then cooking with them. And this has become a common practice for me ever since. The images went viral and I started exhibiting them around the world. This, for example, was an exhibition in Prague in the form of 7 large billboards along a busy road. And the exhibition was a collaboration with a group of food waste activists called Zachan Yidlo, Save the Food. And together we harvested a field of carrots that were left to rot because the supermarket that the farmer was supplying would only accept carrots that had intact leaves. And this is what we found. The work is called Field Study, and it shows how diverse a single crop variety can grow. And many people have forgotten or have never experienced the way how fruits and vegetables can actually look like. It is estimated that we waste around 1/3 of the food we produce, and a lot of it is due to really unnecessary and absurd cosmetic marketing standards. And it is not only fruits and vegetables that accidentally grow outside the norm that are being filtered out in our food system. Of any given crop species, there are hundreds, sometimes thousands of cultivated varieties that humans have developed over the course of history. But most of them are no longer grown because they don't fit our current farming or marketing practices. In 2009, I visited CIFOR-ICRAF, a small non-profit organization that preserves and reintroduces forgotten crop cultivars to the public. I walked into a greenhouse full of tomatoes that I had never seen in my life. This was one of them. Its name was Aunt Ruby's German Green. After this encounter, I started what I called the Cultivar series, in which I attempt to document all the possible varieties that have evolved from a cropland in one species at a time. This collection of tomatoes was the first of the series. These cucumbers cultivars came to me in the form of seeds from the Wageningen seed bank in the Netherlands, and I grew them out in a greenhouse next to my studio. This collection of bean varieties came to me in a small cardboard box from the IPK seed bank in Germany. Many of these pumpkins came from a small farm called Pistol Belly in the foothills of Boise, Idaho. In 2018, I traveled to the US and Mexico to document maize. And on the left, you see the cultivars from Simit Seed Bank in Texcoco, Mexico, that holds one of the largest collection of maize in the world. And on the right, you see cultivars from the Native Seed Bank in Tucson, Arizona, that focuses on maize from the southern US and northern Mexico. And while I was researching maize diversity, I was also looking at what maize is used for today. And in many countries, maize is no longer a food plant. In the US, a single type of corn called yellow dent is planted in giant monocultures. And most of it is used as animal feed or for fuel ethanol. And of the tiny portion that is directed towards human consumption, most of it is in the form of sweeteners, particularly high fructose corn syrup, that is the main ingredient of soft drinks. So for this exhibition, I collected over 200 types of these soft drinks to contrast the actual diversity of maize with the pseudo-diversity that it was replaced with. When the COVID pandemic started, I was unable to travel. And confined to my studio, I started working with what was around me, the seeds that I had collected over the years. This is the seed of a tomato. And think of a tomato. It has become such a common object that we don't really pay attention to it anymore. It has become a mundane object. But if you see it in a different shape or in a different stage of its life, for example, in the shape of a seed, then you can see it in a new light and start reflecting on it. And I'm always looking for this shift of perspective in my work. It is not only the diversity of crop cultivars that has been forgotten. There are thousands of highly nutritious and delicious plant species, yet today we only grow a tiny fraction of them. Only 3 species, rice, wheat, and corn, account for the majority of our crops. Since I started the seed series, I discovered so many food plants that I never knew existed. And here you see the seeds of purple amaranth, slipper gourd, locust bean, okra, hollyhock mallow, cloudberry, purslane, giant granadilla, foxtail millet, yacon, naranjilla, and fenugreek. And these are the species that I have photographed so far. My plan is to document the seed of every edible plant species. But like the cultivar series, the seed series is a never-ending project. And I hope that these series can help raise awareness of the existence, beauty, fragility, and potential of this botanical cornucopia. Crop diversity is the collective natural and cultural heritage of humankind. It has been developed, cultivated, and exchanged by our ancestors for millennia. And it should always remain, like air or water, a common good, freely accessible to all. Thank you very much.
Westphal, thank you, and thank you for bringing the smile also back on the faces. Have you seen what you've just done? That's magic, you know, without being magical. Thank you so much for bringing also the magic of art here on our stage. Thank you, Westphal. All right, we are heading into our closing session. So what will echo from our day? What will stay? What will stick into your minds? What are the to-do lists? And what did you write down on your post-its that you're going to bring back to your desk, of course? Or to the COP in Dubai in 16 days? It's all on the road to the COP, right? So we tackled a lot of questions, and for the summary of the day, I welcome now the president of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. He also chaired the Crop Trust Executive Board from 2019 until 2022. Peter Crane is with us.
Katie, thank you very much. And I think we should also thank the Crop Trust and the Treaty for bringing us all together today, a wonderful group of people. What to say after a day of stimulating presentations, and what to say particularly in 5 minutes, which is all I've got allocated. So I'll start off by saying a few of the things that occurred to me out of our first session. The first key point out of that first session was that I think there's a sense of momentum. We had a UN Food Systems Summit just a couple of years ago that was anchored in the Sustainable Development Goals. We now have the importance of food coming up in COP28. We have the governing body of the treaty next week. We have the report that was alluded to from FAO about the hidden costs of agriculture. I think there's some momentum around this issue, and it's very important that we capitalize on that. The second point, I think, was that we're living in a time of global interconnected crises with both short-term and long-term dimensions. And the State Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Norway emphasized COVID, the war in Ukraine, and so on. The ambassador of Brazil to Germany also mentioned fertilizer supplies and so on. I think it's very important to remember that no matter how tragic or difficult our short-term problems are, and they will demand our attention, the climate crisis is still going to be there. It's not going away. We still have an increasing human population to feed, and problems of inappropriate and inequitable nutrition are evident in the public health crises all over the world, from the world's most developed to least developed countries. So we can't be distracted from tackling these long-term problems by the very important urgent attention that we need to give to these short-term problems. We have to recognize that our agri-food systems are damaging to the planet, that they're built in unsustainable ways, and we have to rise to the challenge, of which climate change is a very important one, and it's no accident and very appropriate, I think, that the Crop Trust, based in Bonn, is based alongside the Climate Secretariat. In the second session of the day, many of the ideas carried over from the first session. The quote of the morning was from Sophie Healy-Thau: "Crop diversity is the silent hero of the food system." And as Alejandro emphasized, crop diversity is a silent hero in some sense, but it's also very present at the community level, which connects to a theme that several of our speakers, including the second panel and also in this last panel today, the importance of local small-scale farmers, small producers, many of whom are women. And we saw in this amazing presentation from CONABIO the importance of 2 million small-scale farmers. And as His Excellency, the Ambassador, said, we not only need to see these problems in a sense from above, but also we need to understand more deeply the view from below. And the importance of partnerships in addressing these complex multidimensional issues was also a theme throughout the day. As the State Secretary from Norway mentioned, partnerships are where solutions come from. I thought that was a great quote. And we heard a lot about partnerships. The partnership needed to develop a truly global system. Partnerships that include smallholder producers, but also the private sector. And we also realize, of course, that going alone is absolutely the opposite of partnerships and not what we need at this moment. So this is a complicated issue. There's much that needs to be done. There's no magic bullet. Many actions will be required across many sectors of society. But a few things can be said with certainty. First of all, we're all in this together. No community, no country, no region is self-sufficient in crop diversity. And no meaningful transformation of global food systems can happen without a base of crops that are diverse at all levels, not only biologically in terms of species and at the genetic level, but also culturally, where there are obviously tangible connections to the people all over the planet. Simone Passarelli mentioned a phrase which I'd not heard before: opportunity profiles, as part of their VAX initiative. Crop diversity provides an opportunity. It's a source of possibilities. It provides options for the future. So there's much to be said, but moving quickly to the third session, where we focus very much on complexity, the reach, the value, the use of gene banks. And the important thing about banks, we heard museums reference. The thing about banks that distinguishes them from museums is that at banks you're allowed to make withdrawals. And withdrawals are really important for seed banks. Withdrawals to use those resources. And we heard about the 3 C's: colorful, in other words, diversity, climate, and costly. And certainly, maintaining seed banks is a costly business, but they're relatively effective, relatively cost-effective mechanisms of sustaining a lot of diversity for the long term. We heard in the wonderful presentation from CONABIO, I love this analogy. Do we want a Polaroid or do we want a movie? I thought that was a really great point. But we also heard that that movie has a finite life. We heard that the people doing this conservation in smallholders are at the ends of their careers, 10 or 15 years. So do we want a movie? Should we not take out insurance when the movie may be coming to an end? We've heard that, unfortunately, gene banks are frequently taken for granted or indeed often overlooked entirely. They absolutely need sustainable funding to be empowered for transformative change. And we know that project cycle funding really does not do the job. We need sustainable funding mechanisms so that gene banks can fulfill their role to preserve crop diversity for the future. But we need much more. Obviously, the things that Susan McCouch talked about, advanced technologies, digital platforms, and so on. And we also need, of course, the important work of the international treaty. So, just to finish in my 5 minutes, to empower gene banks to catalyze the transformation that we need is going to take a kind of concerted and sustained effort by multiple actors. We have many dimensions that we have to influence. Governments, the seed and food processing industries, the research community, civil society, the financial sector, multilateral agencies, it can all seem, and farmers, of course, particularly those small-scale farmers, it can all seem very, very daunting. And it is daunting. And it does take financial resources, because only through adequate investment in gene banks can we ensure that their roles for conservation, documentation, and most crucially, the use of crop diversity are actively fulfilled. Gene banks are foundational. But I think it's clear that business as usual or only modest incremental change will not be sufficient to adequately address the scale and urgency of the problems we face. Society is very complicated. Transformational change is very difficult. So what can we do? We should focus on what we can do, and that is to support gene banks to be ever more effective to their users, from the private sector, but especially to those small-scale farmers who are so important, both for the conservation of genetic diversity, but also for food production. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I hope that at least some of those points will resonate with all of you. Thank you so much.
Peter Crane. All right, having a little bit looking back into our day, now we are coming into the outlook, of course, and for that I welcome Kent Nadosi and Stefan Schmitz on stage. Kent is the Secretary of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and Stefan, you can come both together as the Executive Director of the Crop Trust to give us a little bit of an outlook. So number one, Kent, you got the number one microphone. And number two, Stefan. All right, what's the outlook? How do we say goodbye to each other now? And what are the messages that you'd like to spread?
Thank you, Kati. And I think as Peter mentioned a minute ago, it requires all of us to make progress. So we as a crop trust, what I can give now in a few minutes is just our perspective as a crop trust, and how we think what we can do to bring everybody on board. Before I do this, allow me just 2-3 minutes. Joachim von Braun this morning in his introductory remark referred to this beautiful building, and let me just pick this up again. When you would go around here in Berlin and ask non-expert people walking around, ordinary Berlin people, ask, what do you think, where does the potato come from? I bet many people will say, stupid question, it comes from Germany. Yeah, stupid. I mean, it is so deeply rooted in German culture that we take it from our side. But we learned today that in most places, or in all places of the world, what people eat there does not originate from this place. And that unites us in food. We all have our culture in food, but we are a global community in this. The experts, you know that it was the Spaniards who brought it back, the potato, along with beans, tomato, and maize, and other things. The value chain development, to use a modern phrase, at that time, the value chain development of potato was not working in the beginning, in the 18th century here in Germany. And farmers and consumers, and in those days mostly were identical, simply didn't like potatoes. There is a saying in Germany, was der Bauer nicht kennt, das isst er nicht. What the farmer doesn't know, he doesn't eat. And so However, the Prussian king, Friedrich II, and here in Berlin, and Berlin in those days was the capital of Prussia, he was a real sustainable food system champion. He was really convinced that potatoes would be an important, resilient, high-yielding, nutritious addition to the food system. And so what he did, he let potatoes be planted in his own fields, and he orders his soldiers to guard these potato fields. That made farmers think, wow, that must be something very precious. Perhaps that's something our communication teams think about when it comes to how best to promote neglected and underutilized crops. So in the course of the the potato became a mainstream staple crop in Berlin, in Germany, and in Europe. Friedrich II was the third Prussian king, and his grandfather, and now I come to this building, his grandfather, the first Prussian king, he built this church. And why is this church called the French Cathedral? It was simply at the end of the 1600s, the French Protestants, so-called Huguenots, they lost their religious freedom, they lost their civil rights, and more or less were pushed out of France, and they tried to find new homes all over the places. The Prussian king welcomed them in Berlin, and he sponsored this ship. It is an emigrant church, where until today, a French community in this city has services. It's an emigrant church. So we talked about today, and for me, it's a symbol of tolerance, of innovation, of humanity. We talked a lot today about seeds, and that everybody starts with a seed. That was very important, I think. And seed banks are treasure boxes. And we talked about humankind. We talked about future of humankind in 21st century. We bridged this, and there were great vibes in this very important building, that there is hope, I think, and that is most important. And well, when I think about what is next for us as a crop trust, yet I would like to keep this momentum of hope and the fact that we were able to bring so many people from all around the world together. Many of you come from those places. You are, not all of you, but many of you, you are partners of the Crop Trust. And we would like to take this as a starting point. We would like to invite you from now on to work closer together. Join in a global gene bank partnership. We do not start from scratch. Many partnerships on regional levels, global levels with international research institutes already exist, but we would like to promote it, to foster it, to make progress on this. Because only as a whole system in this partnership we are strong. And beyond this, I think we should somehow make sure that this here today is not a one-off thing, but a starting point of something. We are in discussion with our partners. We are thinking of something like a Global Crop Diversity Day to make it a continuous thing, but we do not want it alone. Again, we want to make it in partnership with others. This is ongoing, and looking forward to come up with a concrete proposal pretty soon. And very concretely for us, yes, I think that was a good step to raise the political profile of plant genetic resources. And we, from now on, we would like to spread the message. We will be present at next week in Rome at the governing body meeting of the Plant Treaty, in Dubai at COP28. Next year, here for you who come from Berlin, at the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture, we try to raise the profile, discuss here and get engaged, and also with a biodiversity COP later, and so on and so on. I think we have a plan now, and with all your support, I think we can make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for that statement. And I think one of the things he highlighted was the issue of partnership. And I think that's a very good partnership that we have with the Crop Trusts that made it possible to have this event today. And the presence of very diverse stakeholders from different countries, different professions, and different sectors is an indication of what we're working about. We're in the business of diversity. When Jasprit's panel was she gave a definition of resilience, but I think there was something that was missing there. The fundamental prerequisite of any resilient system is diversity. Because if there's no diversity in a system, whether it's an economic system, if it's not diverse in its players, actors, and systems, it is going to be so vulnerable that any shock would make it to collapse. Equally, if it is the food systems we're talking about, the fundamental component and element or prerequisite for it to be resilient, to withstand shocks, to advance, to develop, is diversity. And in the agricultural production, that is what we're here for. And that's why we need crop diversity. And that's where we start from the seeds. Many of the presentations and interventions we have today are extremely stimulating interventions, but some of them also highlighted the problems and the challenges that we're facing, currently, globally. Somebody said last night in a different meeting, was talking that previously we used to have sequential problems, but now they're coming in packages, in cascading forms, whether it is human-induced, armed conflicts, whether it's natural disasters, and other things that are coming all together. And you need a very resilient system to be able to withstand them. And you need cooperation and collaboration among the different players and actors to be able to survive this. Because really and frankly, it is, it's an existential question and issue that we're facing these days, whether from climate threats, environment threats, but also from other conflicts that are human-made, incidentally. If there's anything that the COVID had taught us, is the common vulnerability of humanity. That a very little thing could actually destabilize, that little virus that you can't even see, shut down the entire earth for several months. So that as you are, you think you're a superstar, you are invulnerable. You could see how vulnerable that we are really. And we're talking about food security, our livelihood, our ability to survive. And that's why we need to be able to work together, collaborate, and cooperate. There is, of course, the necessity to look at all the different elements and components. While, of course, ex situ collections is a very fundamental and important component of this system, there's also need to complement other areas. We talked about soil health and issues related to soil, but also in situ conservation and those who are working on climate change-related issues. There's a need to take a systems approach to be able to, for us to work together to address all these issues that we are working on. And as Stefan also concluded, that this event is not a one-off thing, because we don't want it to be just another conference and then we all go home. Say, okay, we brought together a lot of people. It was a good reunion for most of us anyway, but at the same time, it must be the seed that we're planting now for further development, to grow, to be able to use the resources that we have to face the challenges that we are facing now, and those that we don't know when they're going to come, because come they will. We don't, you cannot, it is almost inevitable. There'll be definitely other challenges that will come that we're going to have to face, and it is from our ability to use the resources that we have, working together, that we'll face those challenges. And it's through partnerships like this that we can actually work together and face those challenges. So in conclusion, as somebody also said last night, don't forget to ask for the money. Because
Wonderful.
because without the resources, we cannot do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kent and Stefan. Thank you. Come here into the light, yeah? Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you to Kent and Stefan. And now, as the last conference point, promised, we have, of course, the summary of the co-chairs. So I welcome now on stage Catherine Bettini and Jasmina El-Bahlul again on stage for your summary and for your points that you'd like to share with us rolling out of our summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm here again. But before going to the summary, let's remember that the seeds are the beating heart of the agri-food systems. And we are very grateful to the gene banks, the farmers, and all the partners contributing either directly or indirectly, donors, funders, traditional communities, the scientists, and all the contributors to the conservation of the seeds, but not only the seeds, the genes as well, and the traditional knowledge to enhance the crop diversity for sustainable food security over the planet. But now let's go to the summary communique. As a co-chair of this Global Crop Diversity Summit, my colleague Catherine Bertini, chair of the executive board of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, and I now take great pleasure in providing you with key elements of our co-chair's summary, which will form the basis of the communique which will be delivered to the governing body of the plant treaty next week in Rome. Our summit brought together global stakeholders in the plant genetic resources for food and agriculture community to highlight a vital role of using crop diversity gene banks in addressing the linked crisis of malnutrition, climate change, and biodiversity loss. We stressed the critical need to transform agri-food system before reaching climate tipping points and losing crop and trees diversity forever. We explored the contribution of plant diversity to food and nutrition security, environmental sustainability, climate change adaptation, resilience, and social equity. We identified actions to empower gene banks to catalyze agri-food systems transformation and emphasized their role in achieving the new targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We highlighted how the summit will contribute to climate COP28, where key findings on the importance of the use of crop diversity for climate change mitigation and adaptation will be presented. And we urge the global PGRFA community to promote awareness of the contributions of plant diversity to agri-food systems transformation, including by planning for an annual crop diversity day. I will give the floor now to my co-chair, Catherine, to continue the summary.
Thank you, Jasmina. The summit called for a support of national efforts recognizing gene banks' importance in climate policy, in nutrition, in biodiversity conservation, and in development planning. It also urged gene banks to collaborate globally through strategic partnerships, promoting division of labor, knowledge exchange, and mutual learning. The International Plant Treaty was highlighted as a critical framework for collaboration and for sharing responsibilities. The summit stressed the need for significant resources for sustainable gene bank operation, infrastructure improvement, and research capacity. And we urge multilateral organizations, governments, and philanthropic organizations, private sector partners, and individuals to invest in gene banks and in their use. And maybe, Kent, this is part of the ask for the money part. Finally, we concluded by emphasizing the collective effort needed from all sectors for an efficient global gene banking system. We urge investment in gene banks to unlock the potential of crop diversity and to transform agri-food systems for the benefit of all humanity and the benefit of the planet. Thank you all for your engagement and for your support here today and before today and ongoing. Together, let's keep this momentum going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And as a last goodbye, it's always also time to say a thank you, right, Hannes? So who are the names that we should remember because they made all this possible? Of course, the team at the facility center here at the, the backstage center with all the live stream and everything. So thank you from my side. Moderation is always a teamwork. Thank you. But Hannes, you have more names on your mind, right?
Yes, a special thank you goes to the Crop Trust team and the team at the treaty who made this happen today. Thank you so much. A special thank you to Alicia, who really pulled this together in a wonderful way, coordinating this entire day. Thank you so much.
Hannah as well, over there.
And Hannah, of course, the whole comms team has been engulfed in making this happen for the last few months. So a big, big, big thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you. All right. So this was the Crop Diversity Summit here in Berlin. I can't wait to read your tweets and your postings and your questions with the hashtag #SeedsToSolutions. If you have any more thoughts, keep them going. We still have the socials open for you. I can't wait to see you again. We are on the road to Dubai, to the COP, so some of you are going to catch up with you there. All the best for you, and stay courageous in that regard. It's not an easy question to answer, not easy questions to answer when it comes to crop diversity, but it's a family effort. So together, I think there's a lot of courage and energy in the room. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.